It was Mother's Day, May 10th, 2020, a day meant for love, family, and appreciation. But for one woman in the small mountain town of Salida, Colorado, it became the day she vanished forever. Suzanne Morphew, a radiant mother of two, a loving wife, and a woman with a gentle soul, disappeared without a trace after going on what was believed to be a simple bike ride. But what unfolded next would tear her family apart and shock an entire nation. This wasn't just a missing person case. It was the unraveling of a marriage, a town's darkest secrets, and a mystery that would take 5 years to expose the truth. Today, we're diving deep into the heartbreaking disappearance of Suzanne Morphew from the day she vanished to the shocking indictment of her husband in 2025. Stay till the end, because the final twist will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about love, betrayal, and justice. If you love real mystery and true crime stories that make your heart race, then hit the subscribe button, because this case will take you on a journey of hope, lies, and devastating truths. Scene 1. The morning of disappearance. It was a bright Sunday morning in Salida, Colorado. The air smelled of pine and the mountains stood tall in silence. Suzanne Morphew, 49 years old, was known for her warm smile and motherly charm. She had 2 daughters, Mallory and Macy, who adored her endlessly. That morning, her husband, Barry Morphew, said she had gone for a bike ride and never returned. The statement sounded simple. Too simple. Because in the hours that followed, nothing about Suzanne's disappearance would make sense. By the time her daughters tried calling her that afternoon, there was no answer. Not one text, not one call back. Suzanne's phone went silent and her social media, which she often used, stopped without warning. The family's friends quickly realized something was wrong. Suzanne wasn't the type to disappear, especially on Mother's Day. She was the heart of her home, the one who made sure every detail, every plan, every emotion was held together. But that day she was gone, as if she had vanished into the mountain air. Barry Morphew, a local landscaper and hunter, told investigators that he had been away for work in Denver, hundreds of miles from home, when Suzanne disappeared. He claimed that when he returned, he couldn't find her and immediately called neighbors to help. Soon a massive search began. Helicopters hovered above, volunteers combed through forests, rivers, and trails. For days, all anyone could find was Suzanne's bike, lying off a remote mountain path. But there was no blood, no struggle, no footprints leading away. Just silence. As days turned into weeks, hope began to fade. Investigators used drones, dogs, and divers to search every inch of the area, but Suzanne was nowhere. What puzzled everyone was how an experienced woman, familiar with the mountains, could simply vanish on a clear day, leaving no trace behind. People began to whisper, was this an accident, a kidnapping, or something far darker? Every theory was possible, but one question kept echoing through the valley. Where was Suzanne Morphew? While Barry appeared heartbroken in public, something about his behavior made many uneasy. He refused to take part in certain searches, avoided press interviews, and his version of events changed slightly each time. Friends noticed his tone, detached, defensive, and oddly rehearsed. Behind the polished smile and calm voice, investigators sensed a man hiding something, and when Suzanne's phone data was later examined, it would reveal that her life wasn't as perfect as it seemed. Before her disappearance, Suzanne had secretly started keeping notes and text messages. They showed a woman trapped, emotionally exhausted, and no longer sure if her marriage was real or an illusion. "He's not who people think he is," one of her messages read. Those quiet words, written in fear, would later become the foundation of one of the most haunting investigations in Colorado's history. From the moment Suzanne's bike was found, investigators sensed something didn't add up. The bike was lying on its side near a rocky trail. No skid marks, no signs of a crash, and strangely, not a single trace of blood or torn fabric. It looked more like it had been placed there rather than thrown by an accident. Nearby, search dogs lost her scent within minutes, as if she had vanished into thin air. The more the officers examined the scene, the more it felt staged. A desperate attempt to make something appear like what it wasn't. And when Barry arrived on site, his first reaction wasn't panic or devastation. It was control. He quickly began directing volunteers and even told law enforcement where they should look. To many, It felt less like a grieving husband and more like a man trying to control the narrative. As the hours passed, the search intensified, but so did the questions. Barry claimed that he left early that morning for a landscaping job in Broomfield near Denver, a story that could explain his absence. But when investigators checked his movements, the timeline didn't fit neatly. His hotel room showed no evidence of work, no tools, no equipment, no signs that he'd done anything at all. Instead, security cameras caught him moving between trash bins, disposing of multiple bags in random locations across town. It was a chilling detail, one that would haunt the case for years. Why was he throwing away bags on the same day his wife vanished? Friends and neighbors began to whisper among themselves. They remembered seeing Suzanne and Barry together weeks before, arguing quietly near their home, tension in the air. Suzanne's close friend later told police that Suzanne had confided in her about wanting to leave Barry. She was ready to start over, the friend said softly. She wanted peace. Those words painted a heartbreaking picture of a woman trying to escape a marriage that had turned cold and perhaps dangerous. Behind the facade of a perfect family, something darker was brewing, something that had been building for years. Investigators soon discovered something else. Suzanne had been texting another man, someone she had known from her past. The messages weren't scandalous or cruel. They were emotional, raw, and filled with longing for happiness. She told him she was trapped, that she wanted freedom. This revelation changed everything. The police now had a motive: jealousy, betrayal, and control. And when they confronted Barry with the discovery, his calm mask began to crack. His answers became short, defensive, and inconsistent. What had started as a missing person case was slowly shifting into something far more sinister: a potential homicide investigation. Then came a crucial discovery. Data from Barry's truck revealed multiple strange movements during the night before Suzanne vanished. Engine starts, door openings, GPS pings, all during hours when he claimed to be asleep. It was as if he had been driving around in the dead of night, perhaps moving something. Or someone. When agents questioned him about it, he brushed it off as maybe I was chasing a chipmunk. But no one believed that. The evidence was forming a pattern, one that pointed straight back to him. As days turned into weeks, the community's sympathy began to fade. The once beloved husband was now a shadowed figure, calm on the outside but tangled in a web of lies on the inside. News outlets started covering the story nationwide, showing the smiling family photos side by side with the chilling headline, "Where is Suzanne Morphew?" Every night Barry appeared on camera begging for her return, his voice trembling. But to those who studied his eyes, something felt off. Grief has a certain depth, a raw pain that cannot be rehearsed. Barry's eyes didn't carry that pain. They carried fear. When investigators finally got access to Suzanne's iCloud and phone data, a completely different story began to unfold. Her digital footprint, the messages, notes, and pictures, revealed the hidden life of a woman trapped between fear and hope. In her final weeks, Suzanne had exchanged loving messages with the man she'd reconnected with, a man who reminded her of who she used to be before her marriage became suffocating. She wrote about feeling controlled, watched, and exhausted. Her words were heartbreaking. "He wants to own me, not love me." Those words hit the investigators like thunder. Behind the calm suburban home in Chaffee County, there was a storm no one saw coming. The FBI's digital team reconstructed Suzanne's last known activity. On the night before she vanished, her phone showed she had been texting for hours. Messages filled with emotion, dreams, and the hope of leaving soon. But around 2:47 a.m., her phone suddenly went still. No calls, no messages, no movement. It was as if someone had cut the connection to her voice forever. The next morning, Barry's phone also went dark for several crucial hours, a blackout window that perfectly matched the time Suzanne disappeared. Investigators didn't need a confession. The data was already speaking louder than words. Then, an eerie discovery came from Suzanne's Range Rover. Inside, they found a broken charger, her sunglasses, and a tranquilizer dart cap, the same type Barry used to sedate animals during hunting season. The presence of that small metallic piece made investigators' hearts sink. Had Suzanne been tranquilized before she was taken? The idea was horrifying, but it explained everything. The lack of struggle, the missing scent, the silence. It was methodical, calculated, planned. This wasn't an accident. It was an execution of control. In interviews, Barry kept insisting Suzanne was taken by a mountain lion or a stranger passing through. But when asked why her helmet and personal belongings were never found, he grew impatient. His voice cracked, but not with grief, with anger. He slammed the table once and shouted, "I didn't do anything to her." That outburst marked a turning point. Detectives had seen it before. Guilt disguised as frustration. His body language told a story he couldn't hide. The man who once stood as a pillar of the community was now a suspect under a magnifying glass. Meanwhile, Suzanne's daughters were caught in an emotional storm of loyalty and pain. They loved their father but missed their mother beyond words. They refused to believe he could hurt her, clinging to the hope that she might still be alive somewhere. The image of Suzanne, gentle, graceful, smiling in family photos, haunted every television screen in America. Yet behind that smile, people now saw something else, a silent cry for help that no one heard in time. The country began to ask, how many other women are trapped behind perfect walls, smiling through their fear? By late summer, the case was no longer a local mystery. It was a national obsession. True crime enthusiasts, reporters, and online detectives followed every lead, every court document, every rumor. Yet despite all the suspicion, no one could find Suzanne's body. It was as if the earth had swallowed her whole. And until her remains were found, Barry Morphew remained free, walking the same woods, the same mountains where his wife had supposedly vanished. But beneath that freedom, something was closing in. Evidence was building, and soon, the hunter would become the hunted. As the summer of 2020 faded into fall, Barry Morphew's mask began to slip. At first, he tried to play the part of the desperate husband, handing out flyers offering a $200,000 reward for Suzanne's return, and crying on camera during brief interviews. But his tears often came without emotion, and his words felt rehearsed, like a man following a script rather than speaking from the heart. When local reporters pressed him about inconsistencies in his timeline, he grew defensive. "You guys are ruining my life," he snapped once, his voice trembling more with anger than sadness. To the public, that moment changed everything. It was no longer a tragedy. It was starting to look like a performance. Investigators decided to revisit the Morphew home, this time with forensic experts. They found freshly washed sheets, strong bleach odors, and a broken door latch in the master bedroom. Small, nearly invisible blood traces were discovered near the bed frame, traces that were later confirmed as Suzanne's. When confronted with the evidence, Barry's face turned pale. He claimed the stains were old and from an injury she once had. But no report, no hospital record, no memory from her friends matched that story. It was a lie built in panic, and investigators knew it. The home that once held laughter now whispered secrets through every wall. Even more haunting were the results of Barry's truck data. GPS showed that during the early hours of May 10th, he had stopped multiple times near a river and several construction sites before sunrise. Each stop lasted just a few minutes, long enough to discard something small, or someone. The idea was chilling. Detectives quietly began searching those areas again, digging, scanning, draining small ponds, but they found nothing. The mountains of Colorado, beautiful and vast, had swallowed their secret well. Barry's interviews grew stranger as the weeks passed. In one video, he begged Suzanne to come home, saying, "I'll do anything to get you back." But moments later, his tone hardened. "Whoever did this, I'll hunt you down." His eyes flickered between fear and fury, the expression of a man trapped between guilt and performance. Body language experts later reviewed those clips and pointed out subtle signs: forced emotion, inconsistent breathing, and the way his pupils dilated when asked direct questions about Suzanne. They said he was acting, not grieving. And deep down, the world began to agree. Friends and neighbors who once supported him started distancing themselves. "Something's not right," one neighbor whispered in a televised interview. "He's hiding something." And as silence grew around him, Barry's world began to collapse. He sold the family home, moved to a rental cabin, and kept to himself. His daughters, torn by love and disbelief, stood by his side, still praying that somehow their mother would walk through the door and make it all go away. But she never did. Each passing day without Suzanne's voice made the truth harder to deny. By the start of 2021, law enforcement quietly gathered enough to move forward. They hadn't found Suzanne's body, but they had everything else. The phone data, the truck logs, the text messages, the suspicious trash runs, the tranquilizer cap. Piece by piece, the puzzle was forming the image no one wanted to see. Behind the image of a faithful husband was a man capable of anything. And though Barry thought the world had forgotten, the investigation was just getting started. It was a calm May morning in 2021 when the silence of the Morphew case shattered like glass. 2 years after Suzanne's disappearance, agents surrounded Barry's rental home in Chaffee County. He stepped outside, half-dressed for work, completely unaware of the storm about to hit. Within seconds, he was handcuffed. The same hands that had once held his wife's, now bound by cold steel. Neighbors watched in disbelief, as the man they had pitied for so long was led away by the FBI, the husband who claimed to love her more than life itself was now being charged with her murder. News of the arrest spread like wildfire. Barry Morphew arrested for first-degree murder of wife Suzanne Morphew. The headline screamed across every screen in America. Social media exploded with theories, outrage, and relief. For Suzanne's friends, it was a bittersweet moment. Justice seemed to be finally moving, but the pain of knowing she was gone hit even harder. "We just wanted her found," one friend whispered tearfully during a televised vigil. "We didn't want this ending." The nation watched in silence as Barry's mugshot flashed on TV. The eyes that once smiled in family photos now cold, tired and hollow. Inside the courtroom, Barry stood tall but emotionless. His daughters sat behind him, their faces pale, their hands trembling. They still believed in their father's innocence. To them, this was all a mistake, a witch hunt born of grief. They clung to each other as prosecutors read out the charges. First-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and attempting to influence a public official. Each word echoed through the room like thunder. The man once admired by his community was now the center of a tragedy that split his family in two. The prosecutors painted a grim picture. They told the court about the marital issues, the hidden affair, the lies, the late-night truck movements, and the tranquilizer cap found near her car. They described how Barry had allegedly killed Suzanne in a moment of rage when she told him she wanted to leave, then staged her disappearance to look like a bike accident. Every detail was chilling. The defense, however, called it all circumstantial, arguing that there was no physical proof, no weapon, no body, no crime scene. The courtroom became a battlefield of emotion and accusation, every word pulling the audience deeper into the darkness of this case. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed, reporters shouted, and true crime followers camped for updates. The entire country wanted answers. People debated whether Barry was a manipulative killer or a falsely accused husband. Every photo of Suzanne's smiling face brought tears, and every glimpse of Barry in handcuffs stirred fury. The line between truth and assumption blurred, just like it does in every great tragedy. And through it all, one haunting fact remained. Suzanne's body was still missing. As the hearings dragged on, the case began to crumble under its own weight. Key evidence was ruled out, certain data became unusable, and doubts began to rise. Barry's lawyers pushed hard, saying investigators had built a case on emotion, not proof. The prosecution fought back, but even they knew, without Suzanne's remains, their argument was fragile. The case that once seemed solid was now walking on thin ice, and by 2022, that ice would begin to crack in ways no one expected. As months passed, the courtroom battles dragged deeper into exhaustion. Every hearing was filled with tension, investigators defending their theories, defense attorneys dismantling them piece by piece. Barry Morphew's lawyers argued that the state had built its entire case on assumptions and digital data, not hard evidence. They reminded the court again and again, no body, no murder weapon, no witnesses. Their words echoed across America, and for the first time, people began to wonder if the justice system had rushed too soon. The confident prosecution that once seemed unstoppable now stood on shaky ground. Then, in April 2022, the unthinkable happened. The district attorney's office filed a motion to dismiss all charges without prejudice, meaning Barry could be recharged in the future, but for now, he was a free man. The court approved it. Just like that, Barry Morphew, the man once accused of killing his wife, walked out of jail, smiling faintly at the cameras as if stepping out of a nightmare. The world froze. Reporters screamed questions, but he said nothing. He simply raised his hands, nodded to his daughters waiting by his side, and left. Suzanne's friends sobbed in disbelief. How can he walk free when she's still gone? One cried. There were no answers, only silence. The dismissal came because the prosecutors had hoped to find Suzanne's body before trial, a discovery that never came. Heavy snow in the Colorado mountains had delayed searches, and without her remains, critical forensic evidence was missing. The case fell apart under its own weight. Investigators who had spent 2 years chasing every lead were crushed. One agent was quoted saying, "It feels like losing her all over again." They had fought for justice, but in the end, justice slipped through their fingers like sand. Barry wasted no time defending his name. He went on television, accusing law enforcement of ruining his life, destroying his reputation and brainwashing the public. He claimed that the investigation was biased, that officers ignored other suspects, and that he had suffered enough. His tone was calm, almost too calm. He said he still loved Suzanne, still prayed for her return, but to many watching, those words sounded empty, the echo of a man more relieved than broken. The contrast between his freedom and Suzanne's disappearance left millions uneasy. As weeks turned into months, the case faded from the headlines. Suzanne's name slowly disappeared from the nightly news, replaced by newer crimes, fresher stories. But in the quiet corners of Chaffee County, her friends never stopped searching. They hiked the forests, scanned rivers, and prayed in the cold mountain winds. Every rustle of leaves, every shape in the fog felt like a whisper from Suzanne, as if her spirit refused to be silenced. The mystery of her disappearance was no longer just a case. It was a wound carved into the heart of Colorado. And Barry, he moved away, started over, filed lawsuits against the same authorities who once called him a murderer. He seemed determined to erase the past. But the shadow of Suzanne Morphew never left him. Even in freedom, he was haunted by the silence of the woman who once loved him. Somewhere in those mountains lay the truth, buried deep, waiting to be found. And though the law had released him, fate was not finished yet, because 3 years later, the mountains would finally give up their secret. For 3 long years, the Colorado mountains had guarded their secret. Every trail, every riverbed, every clearing had been searched, but Suzanne Morphew was nowhere. Her family tried to move forward, yet her absence hung over them like a permanent storm cloud. Her friends still lit candles every Mother's Day, whispering her name into the cold wind. It seemed the earth had swallowed her whole. But in September 2023, everything changed. A construction crew working in a remote area of Moffat County, more than 40 miles from her home, stumbled upon human remains. Within days, DNA confirmed what many had feared and few dared to say aloud. Suzanne Morphew had been found. The news spread faster than wildfire. Across America, hearts broke all over again. She wasn't coming home. Not as a survivor, not as a miracle, but as a body buried in silence. Her remains were discovered in a shallow grave near a dry riverbed, miles away from the supposed bike trail. The area was isolated, hidden, and reachable only by rugged terrain. It wasn't a place someone would accidentally end up. It was a place chosen, carefully, intentionally, and cruelly. The discovery shattered the illusion Barry had built. Everything pointed to one truth: Suzanne didn't vanish. She was taken, silenced, and buried like a secret the mountains could no longer keep. Investigators quietly reopened the case. Forensic teams combed the site, collecting soil samples, bone fragments, and fibers. Though time had erased much of the evidence, one fact was clear. She hadn't been there recently. She had been moved. That revelation hit investigators like a blade. Someone had returned to that body, maybe long after the search died down, and reburied her. It was a chilling thought, that while the world mourned, the killer had still been out there, moving through the same woods, untouched by justice. The silence of the forest now felt suffocating, every rustle of wind a reminder that evil often hides in plain sight. When Barry was told that Suzanne's remains had been found, his reaction was cold, detached. No visible grief, no collapse, no emotion. He simply said, "I hope they find who did this." To those who had followed the case, it was a moment of anger. The man once accused of her murder was standing free, unpunished, and now claiming to want justice. Suzanne's family and friends were heartbroken but not surprised. "He always played the part," one friend said through tears. "But you can't fake what you don't feel." Public outrage surged. News networks replayed the story nonstop. People demanded accountability, asking why the charges had been dropped when the truth was now lying in the dirt. Across social media, one question echoed louder than all others. Would Barry finally face justice? The prosecutors stayed silent, but behind the scenes, investigators were rebuilding everything: the evidence, the timeline, the motive. It was no longer about theory. They had a body now, and with it came the promise of justice Suzanne had been denied for so long. As night fell over Colorado that September, the mountains seemed quieter, almost respectful. The place where Suzanne was found became a silent memorial. People left flowers, candles, and letters, messages of love for a woman who had suffered in silence. And as the candles flickered against the darkness, it felt as though Suzanne's story was no longer buried. It was rising, slowly but powerfully, demanding the truth that had been hidden for years. The winds whispered through the pines that night, and for the first time it felt like Suzanne was finally being heard. When Suzanne's remains were finally identified, the air in the Chaffee County Sheriff's Office felt electric with both sorrow and determination. Investigators who had once been forced to let go of the case now had a renewed sense of purpose. The discovery had changed everything. Detectives returned to their files, pages yellowed with time, notes scribbled in the margins, photographs that had haunted them for years. This time they weren't chasing shadows. They had a tangible truth, a piece of Suzanne that could finally speak for herself. For months, the FBI and local authorities quietly re-examined every detail, re-interviewed witnesses, and reanalyzed the physical evidence that had once seemed inconclusive. Every data point, every lie, every suspicious movement began forming a story that was impossible to ignore. The site where Suzanne was found offered grim clues. The soil samples contained trace residues of lime and chlorine, substances often used to speed up decomposition. Her clothing was partially intact, yet the fibers told a story of struggle. There were signs that her body had been buried elsewhere first, then moved. It was a detail that chilled investigators to the bone, because there was only one person who could have had the access, time, and motive to relocate her. The more they studied the evidence, the clearer the pattern became. The same pattern that pointed back to Barry Morphew. Meanwhile, public pressure began to mount. True crime podcasts, YouTube analysts, and national media demanded answers. How could a man once charged with murder still walk free after his wife's body had finally been found? The outrage grew daily. Hashtags like "Demand Justice for Suzanne" trended worldwide, while supporters flooded the DA's office with letters demanding a new trial. Even strangers across the country who had never met Suzanne felt her story deeply. A story of love turned control, freedom turned fear. The world was done with silence. They wanted accountability. They wanted truth. Barry, on the other hand, tried to maintain his composure. He continued filing lawsuits against prosecutors, claiming wrongful arrest and defamation. He posed for cameras with a forced smile, painting himself as the victim of a failed system. Yet every word he spoke only made the public more suspicious. He refused to talk about the location where Suzanne was found, or why her body was discovered miles away from the area he had insisted she disappeared. His silence spoke volumes, and people began to see through the mask he wore so carefully. By early 2024, whispers began to spread that a grand jury was being quietly reassembled. The FBI had new forensic data, new witnesses, and a stronger timeline supported by digital reconstruction of the Morphew's final days together. Barry's behavior during that weekend in 2020 now made perfect sense. His midnight drives, his missing phone signals, the trash runs in different towns. They were all part of a calculated cover-up. This time prosecutors wouldn't rush. They built the case piece by piece, like architects of truth, determined not to let justice slip away again. As spring approached, it felt like Colorado itself was holding its breath. The wind carried Suzanne's name once again, whispered in prayers, printed on signs, written in hearts. The people who had loved her refused to give up, and those who had never met her refused to forget. This time, the fight for justice wasn't just about one woman. It was about every silent voice, every lost truth buried beneath fear. And somewhere out there in the quiet of his mountain home, Barry Morphew must have felt the shift, the calm before the storm that was coming for him. It was the morning of April 3rd, 2025, when the announcement broke. Quiet at first, then roaring across every news channel in America. After nearly 5 years of unanswered questions, grief, and relentless investigation, a grand jury had officially re-indicted Barry Morphew for the murder of his wife, Suzanne. The headline flashed in bold red letters: Barry Morphew indicted again. Justice returns for Suzanne. For those who had followed the case from the beginning, it felt like time itself had paused. The man who had once walked free, smiling before cameras, now faced the weight of justice once more. Inside the courthouse in Fremont County, the atmosphere was thick with emotion. Reporters packed the halls, cameras clicked endlessly, and whispers echoed through the courtroom like thunder. When Barry entered, wearing a dark suit, hair grayer now, his face hardened, the room fell silent. His daughters, older but still loyal, sat behind him again, tears glistening in their eyes. The prosecutor's voice trembled slightly as she read the charges aloud. First-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. Each count hit like a drumbeat of truth, long delayed but impossible to silence. Outside, people gathered in the cold, holding signs with Suzanne's face, her radiant smile frozen in time. Justice for Suzanne, one read. 5 years too late, but never forgotten. The crowd wasn't just made of locals. People had driven from other states to stand there, to witness history finally turning its gaze back to a woman who had been taken too soon. The air was heavy with tears and hope, a strange mix of sorrow and satisfaction. Some cried openly, others prayed. For the first time in years, there was a sense that Suzanne's voice was finally being heard beyond the mountains that had buried her truth. Barry's defense team tried to act unfazed, calling the indictment politically motivated and emotionally driven. But this time, the prosecution had evidence they never had before. Soil samples from the burial site matched materials from Barry's work truck. New forensic tests found trace DNA beneath one of Suzanne's fingernails, degraded but consistent with contact. Digital data placed Barry's phone near Moffat County the night before she vanished. Data that had been missing in 2020, now recovered through advanced analysis. The evidence was no longer fragments. It was a complete picture. The walls were closing in. In the weeks that followed, America couldn't look away. News outlets replayed the story like a haunting echo of justice delayed. Talk shows, podcasts, and documentaries dissected every new detail. The story of Suzanne Morphew had become more than a crime. It was a mirror reflecting the cracks in trust, love, and law itself. For every viewer, there was a different emotion. Some felt relief, others anger. And many wondered how a man could hide so much darkness behind such normal eyes. The courtroom became the stage where those questions would finally find their answers. As Barry was led out of the courtroom in cuffs once again, the cameras zoomed in on his face. He didn't cry this time, didn't plead innocence. His expression was blank, unreadable but not fearless. For the first time in 5 years, he looked like a man who finally knew the truth had caught up with him. And somewhere in that silence, beneath the weight of flashing lights and whispered prayers, it felt as though Suzanne's spirit was there too, watching, waiting, ready to see the justice she had been denied for far too long. As the 2025 trial approached, the world once again turned its eyes toward the quiet mountains of Colorado, the same mountains that had hidden Suzanne's truth for years. Snow fell gently over Maysville, coating the pine trees in soft white just as it had on the morning she disappeared. Locals said the air felt different now, calmer, but heavier, as if the land itself carried the memory of her final breath. Documentaries revisited her story. Her friends spoke again in interviews, their voices trembling but strong. Suzanne was light, one of them said. Even in darkness, she tried to make everyone smile. Her words echoed across millions of screens, and in that echo, the world remembered her not as a mystery, but as a woman who had once loved deeply and trusted blindly. Inside the courthouse, the evidence unfolded like chapters of a tragedy written in data and dirt. The prosecutors played video clips of Barry's old interviews, his eyes darting, his smile forced. They showed GPS trails, phone records, and financial statements. Each piece fit perfectly, too perfectly. It painted a man cornered by guilt, desperate to control the narrative. When the photos of the burial site were displayed, the room fell silent. Even the jurors couldn't look for long. A mother, a wife, a soul. reduced to fragments in the soil. The silence spoke louder than any argument. For Suzanne's family, every day in that courtroom was a storm of pain and peace colliding. Her brother stood strong, his eyes never leaving Barry. Her daughters, torn between love and horror, sat through testimony after testimony, the conflict inside them visible but unspeakable. How do you mourn a mother while defending her killer? The tragedy was not just Suzanne's death. It was the emotional ruin left behind, the cracks that would never heal. When the prosecution rested their case, the gallery stood in quiet respect. Tears fell, hearts broke, but justice felt closer than ever. And yet, even in that near climax, the story didn't offer an easy ending. Barry's defense launched a fierce counterattack, blaming investigators, claiming evidence tampering, insisting that Suzanne might have been abducted by someone else. They planted enough doubt to delay sentencing. The trial was adjourned for further review, leaving the verdict hanging like a ghost in the air. The world waited again, restless, divided, haunted. The same question that began in 2020 still lingered, whispered through every headline. What really happened to Suzanne Morphew that Mother's Day morning? Outside, in the fading light of dusk, a memorial stood quietly by the roadside. Candles flickering, flowers fresh, photographs smiling. Strangers came and went, leaving prayers and notes. Some said they could feel her presence when the wind blew across the valley. Others said justice wasn't about punishment but remembrance, keeping her name alive so her silence would never happen again. And as night fell over Colorado, the mountains seemed to hum with her memory, soft, steady, eternal. The story of Suzanne Morphew will never truly end. It lives in every woman who learns to trust her instincts, in every voice that refuses to be silenced by fear. Her disappearance wasn't just a crime. It became a call for change, a reminder that truth can be buried but never erased. Whether Barry Morphew spends his life behind bars or not, the real verdict has already been delivered, in the hearts of millions who refuse to forget her. And that was the haunting case of Suzanne Morphew, a story of love, lies, and justice that took 5 long years to unfold. But even now, questions remain. Was Barry truly the only one involved? Or does the truth still lie somewhere deep in those Colorado mountains? Tell me what you believe, Gar. Was this justice or just another chapter left unfinished? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you want more real-life mystery stories that shake your soul, hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and turn on the notification bell. Because next week, we're diving into another true crime that's even darker than this one. Until then, stay curious, stay safe, and never stop searching for the truth.